Good morning, Upali.
Good morning,
Welcome, Dr.
Nihal.
Wickramasinghe. How are you?
All right, good. I can't see you though.
You can't
Neither
see
do I.
me? Let me start the
Okay.
video. I kept it on mute.
Yeah,
Oh, nice. There you are. In
yeah.
person. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, you look as young as you were ever. I saw you
Morning.
last time.
Oh, afternoon. Morning.
Good morning. Good
How are
morning.
you, Dr. Probe? Nice to see you too. So, Upali, do you have the presentation ready to
Yeah, I do.
share?
Yes. Maybe try it and then see how it goes.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that let me share my video and then see if it works.
Okay. All right. Okay, we all see. Wonderful.
Okay. Let me see the slideshow view just to be sure. Do you see the main without notes and stuff, or you see the notes as well?
Do I
just
see?
Just this page that I am scrolling.
Yeah.
Okay, then perfect.
All right, you could see that.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we are in good shape.
Okay, then I will stop sharing so that we can. I will.
So, what time is it in Rome now?
It's 10:22 in the morning.
Good.
So
Okay.
you are
for me,
awake.
it's 1:30, almost 1:30 in the morning.
Oh boy, sorry. You have to.
Yeah, somebody has to give in, so I decided to give in because it has to make sure that you and audience, the most important participants are more important. So I thought this will good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So there's quite a bit of news lately about food inflation. There's quite a good reports that came out. I think the WFAO released a report on Sri Lanka about a couple of days ago. I saw in the news.
Well, actually, there was a mission undertook by our division. It is EST division. Actually, some of our colleagues went to Sri Lanka, and then the the publication came out yesterday. It was released to the general public only yesterday.
Okay, I see.
So, yeah, I read it in advance, and it's more or less the story that we know of. Nihal, probably you know the situation better than even me, I guess.
Oh no! I'm getting up to speed. The only thing is that this is obviously very timely, because the region have a lot of interest, and there are a lot of questions that still remaining, especially about the international contagion, right? So international food prices. So this obviously would have a lot of interest. And let's see, we have 28 participants. It keeps increasing by every few seconds. We expect a good turnout. It was well advertised. What happens is Sanem distributed the invitation to 6 countries, participants. So we expect quite a good turnout today. So, how long do you think your presentation would take?
I did not test out, but I will try to be within, let's say, maximum 30 somewhere around 30 minutes. I will try to,
that sounds good.
restrict
Then
myself.
we'll open up the flow for back and forth, some questions, and get them a little more interactive.
Yeah, I think that is the idea, no? I mean, it's a dialogue rather than myself giving
wonderful
lecture or anything. And I will
yes,
share this ideas, kind of my view about the whole meeting with the participants all together, so that they know.
Yeah, great. I presume you are at your office today.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Wonderful. Salim, can you hear me? Are you around? Not Salim, Shoaib.
Yes, Dr. Nihal.
You are there. Okay, wonderful. So we are ready to start on time, or let's see how it goes. There's 40 participants now.
So we still have a little bit of
they
time.
Have 5 more minutes.
5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's good. The IMF also started writing a few briefs lately. I've tried to follow a recent one. There was a report. Well, the food index is pretty comprehensive. How often do they update this index?
It's monthly.
Okay.
We publish it every the first Friday of the month at 10 a.m. That's the time that we publish it. It's the precise timing, so you can follow the first Friday 10 a.m. Rome time. So
Hi, Upali.
Oh, hi. Good to see you, Pushpa. How are you?
Same here. After a very long time. How are you?
All right. Good. I don't know. COVID and so on. We haven't been able to keep in touch, but
Exactly.
Good to see you, Pushpa, after a long time.
Same here. I was very excited when I saw the program and that you are presenting.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Nihal.
Hi, Pushpa.
How are you?
So you Upali has spent quite a bit of time in Kathmandu, didn't he?
Yeah. Nihal, I still miss Kathmandu Valley.
Yeah, and even after Upali left Kathmandu, we were in touch.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, we have known for some time. So even after he was
That was about 20-something years ago, Upali, wasn't it?
Well, I was stationed in Kathmandu from 1999 to 2003. But then, as you know, I have been going back and forth because of the SOTI programs and some ESCAP work and FAO work and so on. So I spent quite a bit of time, even in 2008, I believe, in Kathmandu, about a month or maybe even longer. And likewise, kept on going back to Kathmandu every now and then.
Oh, wow. Good. Yeah, it's one of my favorite places to be.
Yeah. But I didn't know that you had moved to Italy. I thought you were still in the ESCAP Indonesia office.
No, I moved here in 2017.
Okay, wow, it's been some time. That means how long we have lost touch.
Yes, absolutely. And then came the pandemic, and while I was sort of settling down to the new job and everything, the pandemic came and we got stuck basically, so we could not do much. And so that's what happened. Yeah, I met Ratnakar, I think one time in Rome and somewhere else also.
Okay.
Dr. Nihal, we have participants from the 6 countries. The participants from Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and Thailand joined today's session. From SANEM, we welcome all of them to today's session. Dr. Nihal?
I'll be with you in a minute. Hi. So we have how many? 60 odd so participants. We'll give it a few more minutes to Upali, Dr. Upali, if you don't mind. They tend to turn up right at the clock or just a minute past sometimes. So it's the interesting part comes after the first 5 minutes, first few minutes. So they would very well touch all of the essence of the presentations. Yeah, this is pleasantly surprised. You're in good company. There are a few people who already know you in the audience, so you're in familiar territory. We have invited, obviously, SANEM has sent the invitation to the policymakers, a few of them that will be here today, and then some of the other stakeholders as well, Dr. Wickramasinghe. So you find a fairly diverse audience today. What's the time? 1:32. Sure, what do you think? Do we give it a few more minutes?
Dr. Nihal Pidigala, we can start the session formally.
Can we? Okay. It's in session. Is it been recorded?
Yes, the session is recorded.
All right. Well, good morning to you there. I think I'm the only one who's late nighter today here back in California. So this is, my name is Nihal Pitigala, part of the CBEC team. This is part of the USAID cross-border connectivity program that we do in collaboration with the SANEM network, which we conduct a series of lectures and seminars of very important timely topics. Now, today's topic, I can't emphasize enough of its importance. As you all know, inflation, especially the food inflation price, is a significant concern for the South Asia region, not only the South Asia region. Thailand is not spared too. I just saw news that food price inflation is close to 10%. Large share of the South Asia population, actually 1/3 of the global poor, who spends a substantial amount on a proportion of their income on food. So the surge in food costs in South Asia is a great concern. And also the 1/5 of the calorie comes from the wheat products, pose a significant challenge. As you know, the ongoing war, Russia war in Ukraine, and then it has significant impacts and several other factors. So today, we have Dr. Upali Wickramasinghe. I have great pleasure in introducing a friend and a colleague who deliver a presentation on a food price index. And he would talk about why food prices remain high, even the recent declines in prices have not led to better access to lower prices of food at a retail level due to certain factors. The presentation will cover recent international food price developments and their underlying factors from the global point of view, allowing the policymakers to develop a broader perspective that may help them to tackle the specific challenges. Now, the audience today, they have a diverse audience, Dr. Wickramasinghe. They represent the BIMSTEC countries, the 6 BIMSTEC countries. We have, I would basically, since there are so many, I wouldn't want to sort of give a broad introduction, but very briefly to introduce Dr. Wickramasinghe. He's actually senior economist, team leader at the Basic Food Commodities and the Markets Trade Division in Food and Agriculture Organization in the United Nations, Rome, Italy, FAO. Before joining FAO, he served as a regional advisor on poverty reduction and food security in Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP region. And he was a former economic advisor to the Secretariat, some of you already know. He's a professor of economics at the University of Sri Javadhan, Sri Lanka. His current field of interest include global food commodity markets, price developments, and sustainable agriculture development, and the market for household resilience to shocks. He holds his PhD from the University of Manoa. Now, before I turn it over to Dr. Wickramasinghe, I just want to say that, we want to make this very interactive. We want you to participate during the session. You can post the questions on the thread, and after Dr. Wickramasinghe makes his presentation, we'll open up the floor for your questions and answers, and I welcome, feel free. You're in good company, relax and enjoy, and we want you to interact with Dr. Upali, once he finished the presentation, and there's adequate time to field dozen or so questions, and we'll take it as how it moves. Over to you, Dr. Wickramasinghe.
Thank you very much, Nihal. Indeed, it is my pleasure to participate in this discussion, not just because that I am with lots of my former friends, colleagues. I have been living in Asia for most of my working life, Kathmandu, Bangkok, Indonesia, of course, Sri Lanka, and some of the other South Asian countries. I have been working there, and now it's a different role that I play here at the FAO head office, basically looking after these basic food commodities and food price index and so on. So it is indeed my pleasure to give a little bit of a perspective from our side, what we see at the international level, so that, as you said, Nihal, that idea here is that while I will basically focus my presentation on international food prices as we measure by using FAO food price index, but then we need to link these prices to retail prices, as you said, but of course there is a huge gap between international prices and retail prices. So we'll come to that later on. Without taking much time, let me turn on to my presentation. So can you see the main slide?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Now, the topic is global food markets, recent trends and drivers of price development. Now, given this broader topic, but in my presentation, I will focus mainly on international prices using FAO food price index. Let me give a brief sort of an overview to the some preliminary notes on the FAO food price index. Now, this was introduced in 1996 to help monitor developments in the global agricultural commodity markets as a way to gauge what is happening at the international level so that we can monitor what the levels and so on. So FAO price index has gone through two revisions, major revisions, 2007 and 2020, which was very recent, and we have updated the various price indices, how we measure and so on. Now, interesting thing to note about the FAO food price index at the outset is that it's formed from prices of bulk food commodities. It's not at the retail level, it's bulk food commodities in international trade expressed in FOB prices. Now, if food price index consists of 5 commodity groups. We look at cereals, we look at vegetable oils, we look at dairy, meat, and sugar. You may ask why these particular food commodities are covered, whereas not others. But the basic point here is that we want to, FAO has been sort of thinking about the best way forward to get prices available to us at the international level. And this covers about approximately 40% of gross agricultural commodity trade. These are chosen for high strategic importance in global food security and trade. As you can, I will describe it later on when you see the index and then how it has performed and the kind of international prices you may have seen. It really captures the kind of trends very well. So that was the key point, that was the important point. Now, when it comes to, I mentioned commodity groups, now it also covers, in terms of commodities, it covers 25 commodities. Like, for example, if I take cereals, it includes wheat, maize, barley, sorghum, and rice. If you take the dairy price index, it covers, it includes butter, skim milk powder, whole milk powder, and cheese. Likewise, if you look at the meat price index, it includes 4 types of meat. We call bovine, you call it, beef, bovine, ovine, that is lamb, and pig meat, and poultry meat prices, and so on. So that's how it, in terms of, I'm not going to get into technical details, but it uses the last payer's price index, as it facilitates updates over time to accommodate structural changes in food markets. As you very well know, that the food consumption change over time because of various factors. So when we make the updates, so we should be able to handle that easily. So that's one of the advantages in this index. And just one other thing that you should know is that prices are combined using trade weighted weights. Basically, current index uses 2014-16 international trade in these commodities, the average value for those 3 years. We have chosen these 3 years primarily because of the kind of stability during this particular time. Of course, you could argue otherwise, but this is how we are measuring it. And we use 95 price quotations every month for measuring the FAO. Now, and what you see when we publish every month, most of the time we refer to nominal prices. But over time, of course, if you would like to make a comparison over time, you need to get real values. But we use the conversion World Bank index of the trade unit value of manufacturers. And that is what this is open for debate. Indeed, some of those who are doing fresh research might want to look at this and whether this is how we could improve and so on. This is open for discussion and further research, as I would like to mention. Now, with this, let me focus on some of the recent developments in the FAO food price index. Now, as you see here, is basically you see the nominal price index all the way from 1961 to 2022, both nominal and real values. As you can see, based on the calculations up to August, that is the latest numbers available. Food prices have risen above the 1974 level, even in real terms. So that is what all of us are talking about. That is why the whole world is concerned about, all the way from American Senate, Congress to other countries around the world, all the way from households to governments and so on. This is basically this is the kind of big change that what we see in international markets. Now, unfortunately, we will know the final value for 2022 annually only from in next January, because we will still have 4 months of values to be added. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that actually all of you could either send a message to Shoaib or Nihal, or you can stop me if you have any technical questions. As Nihal said, this is an interactive discussion. We would like to make it more interactive rather than thinking of it as a lecture and something like that. But more important thing is for us to have a dialogue, so that most of you who are experienced at the country level may have different views, different ways of thinking, and we could discuss some of these ideas. Now, in terms of the nominal values, as you can see from 1990, this is what you see here is the monthly. By the way, the monthly values are available only from 1990. From 1961 to 1989, we have only the annual values that we could compare. But from 1990 onwards, we have monthly values. This is how it has evolved. As you can see, we see the 2006-8 price at the time. It was called soaring food price crisis, and then 2011 to 12, and then 2022. Basically, it went all the way from 2020 to March 2022. That is the peak that it has reached, and then it has started coming down. Now, what you see here is the performance of the 5 sub-indices: sugar, dairy, cereals, vegetable oils, and meat. Now, as you can see here, that vegetable oils increased the most, or the volatility was extreme in the vegetable oils sub-index, followed by cereals. But of course, when it comes to consumers, cereal price index is the most concern for most of the consumers. When it comes to dairy and meat, of course, they are particularly important commodities, but still, as we all know, people might even, give up consuming dairy and meat, but cereals we cannot. So that's now we have seen uninterrupted increases since mid-2020, pricing to all-time high in March 2022, with increases in all 5 commodity groups. Since April, our index has been falling. I already mentioned this factor. Now, in terms of August, we see August price decline. This was the if you look at from March, food prices fell consecutively for 5 months, following an all-time high reached in March. With this new decline in August, our price index has fallen 13.6% from its peak in March. However, as you can imagine, it remains 7.9% above its value a year ago. Now, even in August, it's important to note that international price quotations, all the 5 sub-indices represented in the index declined moderately. Now, for those who want to really look at, understand prices, price indices, this is normally how we compare prices, because if you look at just 1 month's value, it doesn't mean anything basically. Either you compare it with the previous month on month. The whole table actually gives you August prices versus whatever the month on month, that is August versus July, year on year, meaning August this year compared to August last year, and then from peak values. Now, as you can see, this is the number that I mentioned earlier, still 13 point, from the peak it reached, it's 13.6% below, but meat did not increase as much and then did not fall as much. And dairy, likewise, it is the situation. Cereal prices within this from March have fallen by 16.3%. Vegetable oils 35.1. Now, sugar, of course, did not reach its peak during this period, but we are comparing it. The peak value we still have is January 2011. Now, now what I would like to do is to give you a little bit of more detail about sub-indices levels, so that we can have a kind of a discussion, interesting discussion, relevant for us, relevant for countries and so on. Now you see here, I'm presenting FAO cereal price index, the wheat price sub-index, coarse grains and rice. Now, some of you may be wondering what are coarse grains. Coarse grains consist of maize, sorghum, barley, basically, and the rice index. Now, as you see here, all the way from 2020 up to here, wheat and maize cereal price index kept on rising steeply. And then much of the increase was driven by wheat and maize. And when we do the analysis, we look at both the supply side as well as demand side. Now, I mean, this is simple economics. Basically, on the supply side, as for cereals, we have seen weak export availabilities driven by many factors, but one of the key happened to be the La Nina weather-related dry conditions in some parts of the world. I will discuss that a little later. And from February 2022, Ukraine's port disruptions because of the war in Ukraine had a big impact. Plus export restrictions imposed by a number of countries as a result that some of them worried about whether they will have enough for local consumption, and then the political ramifications that that may entail. So that's what happened here. Now, as we have seen from here, FAO cereal price index dropped, continued to drop, and then in August for the 3rd month in a row, while it was down by 16.3% from its peak reached in last May, it remained 11.4% up from a year ago level. As you can see, although we still discuss prices are falling, it's a good thing in terms of access for at the international level or country level, but prices remain high. Prices remain elevated across the board, the wheat, coarse grains, as well as rice. Now, why prices kept on falling during this time? A couple of reasons, a couple of factors that we observe at the international level. One is world wheat prices fell partly in response to increased production prospects in Canada the United States and the Russian Federation. Plus, because of this agreement sponsored by the United Nations, there was this exports began flowing out of Ukraine's Black Sea ports. So that also contributed to a decline in prices. And in terms of coarse grain prices, by contrast, continued to increase marginally, primarily because of gains in main prices, influenced by lower production prospects, particularly in the European Union and the United States, because as you see that we are still facing some parts of the United States and the European Union hot, dry weather conditions. So that kept coarse grain prices sort of either stable or slightly rising marginally. Also, a resumption of exports from Ukraine was kind of played a negative role, but now as for rice, what we see is that international prices, at least in August, held somewhat steady. Now, let me move on to vegetable oil prices. Did someone want to say something?
Was there a question? Okay, maybe not.
Okay. Now, vegetable oil prices rose the most from mid-2020 to early 2022. Now, we measure three price indices here. You see oils, oil meals, and oil seeds. I want to emphasize the fact that when it comes to the food price index, it includes only vegetable oils, and other two indices are not. Okay, so that is why I am showing here soybean oil, sunflower oil, and palm oil. And as you can see, the oils, vegetable oils increased the most. And here you can see soybean oil prices increased, but started coming down. Sunflower oil, likewise. Palm oil had a similar change. Now, what were the key factors that drove these increases? On the supply side, we saw below potential palm oil outputs from major producing countries in Southeast Asia as well as other parts. And we had export restrictions imposed by Indonesia. And also for sunflower oil in particular, the war in Ukraine disrupted sunflower oil exports from the Black Sea ports. So that created the supply side sort of bottleneck. And on the demand side, also we have seen a robust crushing demand in the United States driving prices. Now, oil seeds index also reached an all-time high, although it is not part of the food price index. I must emphasize again. Lingering global supply tightness of soybean and rapeseed amid robust crushing demand, mainly in the US. Of course, they are linked, but not directly measured in the price index. And in August, vegetable oil prices fell to a 13-month low, averaging slightly below its earlier level. In August, world prices of palm, sunflower, and rapeseed oil dropped, while those of soy meal increased. There were a number of factors. As for palm oil, we have seen rising export availabilities from Indonesia, partly because lower export taxes. You may know that Indonesia lowered its export taxes very recently. And then also there is this impact from seasonal rising outputs in East Asia, especially, including Indonesia, but Malaysia as well. Now, as for sunflower oil, the main impact came from the opening of the Ukraine's Black Sea ports for exports. So that and prices of rapeseed oil also fell on increased prospects of ample supplies for the upcoming 22-23 season. Here, it is important for us to sort of get a basic idea that within our unit, we not only monitor prices, but also we monitor the production levels, and then we do forecast, short-term forecast. That is basically our unit does across these basic food commodities. So constantly we keep on updating our numbers and then see the likelihood of production coming into the market, and then what is likely to happen in terms of production and so on. So on this basis, we know that that 2022-23 season, we may have better prospects for ample supplies for rapeseed oil. Now, soy oil also rebounded due to unfavorable weather conditions in the United States, part of the United States, that raised concerns over soybean production. Now, you see the dairy price index, as I mentioned, also kept on rising. Compared to vegetable oils and cereal, it wasn't as much volatility, but prices kept on rising. But as you can see here, that cheese prices is an exception. Even recently, cheese prices did not fall as such, mainly because of very robust demand, including in the European Union internal market. Now, again, similar to other commodities, DPI, that is the dairy price index, reached a historical high in June, mainly because of tight supplies from the European Union. Well, if you have time, we can discuss more details, but over the last couple of years, we have seen very tight milk deliveries coming from the European Union, to some extent in Oceania as well, mainly because of low dairy herd, labor shortages, logistical issues in the case of New Zealand in particular. And also there had been a decline in demand, slowdown in growth, especially from China, but nevertheless, prices kept on increasing. Only in the last couple of months, we have seen dairy prices have come down. Now, as I mentioned, Chinese import growth has slowed down, also from East Asia, but other East Asian and some Central American countries, especially Mexico, we have seen some robust level of demand from these countries, partly because of the end of pandemic related restrictions mean that hospitality industry, including tourism and so on, began performing better in some of these countries. As a result, demand for dairy products increased. Now, if you look at the August prices, the prices declined just about 2%, but it averaged 23%, 5% above its value a year ago, meaning that, see here that this price level is still very high compared to last year levels. See here, somewhere here. And so this is the previous peak. Now, butter and milk powder prices, in particular, there was this weaker demand for spot supplies and market expectations for increased supplies from New Zealand in the 22-23 season. Now, New Zealand has begun its 22-23 season. The milk cycle goes from June to May. I mean, it depends on countries, and so New Zealand, there is this big expectations in markets that New Zealand will have decent amount of supply. As a result, market prices came down. And but nevertheless, I must say that the global dairy supplies remain tight due to lower milk production in Western Europe in particular, as well as the United States. And cheese prices, as I mentioned earlier, continue to firm in response to steady growth in global import demand. Now, meat price index had a similar pattern. It kept on rising. And compared to other markets, meat prices had a different set of impacts or factors driving the markets. There was this huge issue of low availability of animals for slaughter, both from Oceania and other major suppliers, including South America. Of course, they kept on increasing, but supplies remained tight. European Union, of course, faced this African swine fever crisis, and as well as highly pathogenic avian influenza crisis that was widespread both in Europe, parts of the United States, and so on. So it's a different set of combinations. Besides the pandemic-related supply side bottlenecks or the restrictions that we have seen during that time from 2020. Now, poultry meat, on the other hand, we are seeing prices have been very resilient, meaning that kept on rising, partly because poultry happened to be the most affordable meat type after all, because of red meat prices. If you look at here, poultry prices range from 1,200 to 2,700 per ton, whereas pig meat prices are also like this. But look at bovine meat prices. We are talking of per ton 4,000 to 7,000 per ton. And likewise, lamb prices for Australia, 3,500 to 7,500. So these are basically out of reach for a lot of consumers in the world. As a result, not only in importing countries, but also in producing countries, including in Brazil, consumers have tended to move into poultry consumption rather than the other red meat. So that gave actually a possibility for some of these countries to meet the international import demand, including from China. Now, pig meat, we have a particularly interesting situation. After this huge African swine fever led reduction in output, production began increasing, actually much faster than all of us expected. And as a result, demand has been slowing down. If you look at it, it's interesting. I don't have that graph with me right now, but if you look at Chinese domestic prices and international prices, or their imports, highly correlate. There was this increasing prices, and then prices began coming down, and that's what we have seen. And that has a cascading effect on other international markets, and then having impact on prices globally. I think I will move on quickly. If there are interesting discussions, I can come back on these. Now, sugar prices also we have seen, but increases, but not as much. Volatile this year, basically favorable production prospects and so on. And in August, the prices fell down, mainly because of increased export availabilities, Brazil, and lower demand for ethanol and weak Brazilian real versus USD, and India's increased the sugar export cap. India had the cap, and then that. Okay, now I think this is basically what happened at the international level. Now, what I would like to do right now is to quickly take you through some of the key elements that we see as driving food prices and food production, global food markets across the world, as you see. One area that we look at and we monitor is extreme, the weather conditions, weather forecasts at the global level. Now, this has come from the World Center for, what is it called? Center for Climate Prediction. And as you can see here, interesting for us to note that this is March, May, June, July season, 3 months, 2010. You see the blue areas are basically the La Nina related weather events. And you see here is all the way from June, August, September. Weather anomaly that as predicted by the Weather Prediction Center. And you see some similarity here that it went on and on. Likewise, this time also the La Nina weather pattern continued all the way from here. Now, what this means is that actually consistent rainfall pattern shifts across the regions and seasons. This is a kind of way to look at it. What happens with this is some wet regions, and as well as drier conditions in other parts of the world, as we see. So what this means is when you see these back-to-back La Nina events, we have seen the same thing happening in earlier periods as well. If you were to look at the dairy price index, what happened in 2013, dairy price index reached its all-time high in, I believe, December 2013. And that is the time the world experienced this La Nina weather pattern. And New Zealand faced extremely dry conditions. And now we see the same situation, worst drought in nearly a century that we have seen, like for example, Brazil, and followed by cold temperatures, both Brazil and Argentina. That led to lower production of coarse grains, oil seeds, and sugar. And 2021, this is 2021 season. Excessive rains in 2020, combined with labor shortages, led to lower oil seed production in parts of East Asia. Now, see, the issue is that part of the world faces extremely dry, extended periods of dry weather, whereas other parts face excessive rainfalls and precipitation. So that both extremes impact food production. Now, this is the Weather Center's, Climate Prediction Center's forecast. As you can see, this was released on 15th August. Official probabilistic ENSO forecast. As you can see, it goes all the way. This is we are here, February, March, December, January, February, and so on. Now, this blue bars show La Nina forecast probability, meaning that climate weather condition is likely to continue coming season with 86% of chance, and December, February 22-23 season with 60% of chance. And February, April 2023, El Nino southern oscillation is favored, meaning then this raises concerns over key food crops production already in the ground as well as soon to be planted. This is the most important factor. We look at these forecasts, and already we know where crops are planted, and then based on this we can figure out which parts of the world will have a bigger impact, and then to what extent this is likely to impact certain types of food commodities production. So that is very important information for us to figure out or think about what is likely to happen in the next couple of months. That is our major job. Now, to save time, I will not go into this one. FAO has this very good database you can leisurely access to look at weather maps, very detailed weather maps, the kind of precipitation levels, as well as the various other indicators showing for every 10 days. So you can see the satellite-based information, weather maps to overlap with your own information to see what is likely to happen. Now, beyond the climate crisis, we also face the extremely high energy price volatility, and I'll come to that producer margin component in a minute. Now, we see very strong linkages between energy and food markets through both the supply side as well as from the input side. Now, because high energy, we will have higher fertilizer prices and prices for production and electricity for processing, higher food, feed and fiber prices, and so on. And when we have when energy prices go beyond a threshold, then we will have a higher competitiveness for feed for producers to use some food commodities as feedstock for biofuel production. So that leads to a higher feedstock use, lower food and fiber availability. Now, we have been monitoring what is happening across various energy markets. You see here crude oil prices, West Texas Intermediate. I converted this into 2014-16 as 100 just to make a comparison with our food price index. Now, this energy price volatility means that food production, processing, transportation, and distribution are all aspects of food production is impacted. Now, on the other hand, also energy price increase means increased demand for biofuels if it goes beyond the threshold level, and it also impacts producer margins. Now, this is one of the key elements for fertilizer production, high gas prices, which resulted in a spike in fertilizer costs. As you see here, natural gas prices increased. Now, here you see this is the 2005. This is spot prices, Henry Hub, Louisiana, and see that this shows the impact of hurricanes Rita and Katrina in the United States. And then 2008, also tight supply due to the current, what has happened is here, prices have increased significantly, mainly because of the war in Ukraine and then the impact on European gas prices, and also economic sanctions. These are all related issues that impacted the market. Now, how this is linked to the agriculture? Because natural gas is a key ingredient in urea and ammonia production. As a result, fertilizer prices go up. And upgrade margins, what that means is that when you compare how much, is there any value? If I am a fertilizer producer, I look at whether I can use natural gas to produce fertilizer prices. If there is a threshold or level beyond which you lose, then you tend to either stop or scale down your production. So that's simple as that. Now, production processes also uses natural gas. For example, potassium chloride shown here. Also, milk powder production. Drying of milk powders uses a lot of natural gas, and as a result, in some countries, some firms have begun to lower production. So this feeds back into our food prices. And animal feed production also uses natural gas. And with high feed costs, what we have is producer margin squeezes and low feed use in the livestock sector. And the point that I want to show here is that natural gas prices in Europe reached an unprecedented level. As you see here, urea prices was natural gas prices. The red line is the natural gas. Urea prices are here. And so basically what I mentioned earlier, that is the upgrade margin became negative. So as a result, producers, some of the companies producing fertilizer have scaled down production significantly. Now, to measure this, FAO recently put together global input price index. I have numbers only up to April, but as you can see, the margins turn negative after some point. So meaning that producers tend to lose. I mean, agricultural producers may no longer interested in using some of the high cost agricultural inputs, impacting the quality as well as the quantity of food that comes to the market. So here the issue is actually we also looked at the affordability of fertilizer, which has gone down. And then the war in Ukraine, I think I will rush through quickly to save time, give you more time for discussion. Basically, what I would like to mention here is that there were a number of factors impacting global food prices. And the Ukraine crisis basically exacerbated those impacts both through supply side as well as input side. Supply side because of limitations to export from the Black Sea region, as well as direct impact on production in Ukraine, but also impact through the gas prices as well as fertilizer prices. Now, because both Ukraine and Russia happen to be key suppliers of both major food commodities as well as fertilizer, as you can see here. Now, that had a huge impact on importing countries. Some of the countries were completely dependent on wheat for some commodities on imports from the Russian or the Ukraine and Russian Federation. So that had a big impact on importing countries. Now, Fertilizer market is another area. This shows the reliance of some importing countries from Russia. As you can see, all the way from nearly 100% for Mongolia and likewise for some other countries. Now, here I would like to mention that we look at all these factors, plus, as I mentioned, we do our short-term forecasts, and this is one way to look at our cereal market summary at the moment. And probably I will not go into details. Perhaps if there is interest, we could have another discussion on how do we do forecast and what are the elements, what is our methodology, and so on. But what is important to note here is that this point in particular, if you look at, this is how we normally do it. We look at production, we look at utilization, and we look at stocks. Now, when we look at these three indicators, what they tell us is that they tell us how much availability we will have at the global level. Now, based on the current level of production and numbers we have, we can see that cereal availability, for example, we do similar analysis for other commodities, but this is cereal overall. Cereal availability at the global level is guaranteed, but we all know that we have a huge issue of access to food. Now, the issue is, if production conditions are negative for whatever reason, it could be war, it could be the weather conditions and so on, then we will have not only an access issue, but availability issue starting from 22-23. That is what FAO, for example, is concerned. And on top of that, some countries impose export restrictions, further restricting some regional availability, country level availability, leading to both availability and access issues at the global level. Now, we do, this shows you some of the main publications that we are responsible for.
But let's open up the floor. I'm sure there's a lot of interest. Already we have two questions. We have two forwarded, and the others we will wait. In the interest of time, why don't I quickly read through the question that is posted, and then we will try to open up the floor for any further discussions. The question Ayub has is, I'm trying to understand. I think Dr. Wickramasinghe Upali mentioned this about the Russia-Ukraine war. What your question was, the commodity, what will impact the FFPI analysis based on the Russia-Ukraine war? I will leave that to Upali, and then the second question we have, Ayub has two questions. He mentions that Bangladesh, they have two major factors, and it's a statement, it's not a question. One is the export restrictions, and the other was devaluation of the taka. Absolutely, I think the dollar is an important consideration. The third one is from Arjit Chakraborty. Sir, you have any data about the damages which has happened for food supply chain? Can you suggest any specific trade patterns to adopt for decrease in food price in the retail market? Those are the two questions that was posted. So why don't we quickly, Upali, revert to those two questions in general? I think then we can sort of open up the floor.
Okay, let me take the first question that is related to the war in Ukraine. Yes, we monitor the supply situation and the likely impact on global food markets because of the war. But there is no methodology we have at the moment to measure the direct impact on the FAO food price index. Unfortunately, there is no way that we can isolate that impact. That no, we haven't done any analysis, and it's technically a difficult exercise, I can imagine. Second question is about the taka devaluation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, indeed, we are quite aware. In fact, that is a variable that we keep on monitoring across the board, at least for some of the markets that we monitor food prices and so on. And also, when we do the calculations, of course, as I mentioned, we measure all the prices in USD. So what that means is that when the prices are given in FOB, say European euro or Brazilian real or Australian dollar or New Zealand dollar, then we use the average exchange rate to convert that into the US dollar prices. But indeed, that at the measurement level also we see that impact. Sometimes in local currency prices decline or increase, but depending on the exchange rate, sometimes the values reverse. So that is one level. Second level is for countries like our part of the world, let's say Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, and so on. If the depreciation prices, I mean, the exchange rate depreciates, our currencies depreciate, what that means that we have, of course, these countries will have to pay higher prices for importing. So that is at the local level. So there is no way that we measure that, or it doesn't get into FAO food price index as we measure it. One thing we need to keep in mind is that FAO food price index, as I mentioned, is an international food price index measured at the border level, that is FOB level, that is up to the ship, basically. Now, from international prices to that level, FOB prices to retail prices, we have a huge gap, including shipping costs, freight, insurance, import charges, and then processing the food. Like, for example, wheat, when a country imports, it may be in a whole container, for example, and then it has to go through crushing, processing, and packaging, and so on. And at the end, at the retail level, markup prices to cover their costs. So there's a huge difference between international prices and retail prices. So at the international level, for example, as a result, prices could decline, but still at the retail level, prices could continue to rise. So there is no contradiction in it. It's purely because the difference between what we measure. And in order for us to look at retail prices, then we need to really look at local price indices and make a comparison. And let me stop here.
And that distinction is a very important one, Upali, you mentioned, between the internationally denominated prices and the local prices. Obviously, the currency appreciation, Sri Lanka is a classic example of that, and obviously now the taka. So the reflection of domestic prices are made it. What you mentioned about the access and availability is a very good point, and I mean, there's not enough time to discuss both of those. But let me also sort of revert to a couple of other questions quickly. Gopal Pradhan asked the question, what are the likelihood of getting food prices stable in coming days? I presume it's coming days and weeks. Dr. Meena Karna has, these days food prices are increasing everywhere. It's 200%, 300%. Now that reflects on what you mentioned. Those are the two questions. Is there anything else? I think those are the two questions, Upali, that was posted.
Well, actually, you can access food price index every month. I mentioned to you earlier, our food price index data as well as our write-up is released the first Friday of the month at 10 a.m. Rome time. And so it's publicly accessible, available, anyone accessing the markets. In fact, I have given the access link to our prices, and then you can access all the prices available. If you still have questions, you could write to us directly and ask for details. And in fact, we keep on getting a lot of queries from international media, country level, and sometimes clarifications. Please, we would like to, as much as possible, help countries to I mean, we provide this information freely, and that is basically a sales job. Thank you.
Okay, so there are few people raise hands. I'm trying to get sure access. Oh yeah, there to make him course. Okay. While I try to figure this out, there are some other questions that individuals can kindly raise your hand, or you can basically unmute yourself. Please go ahead. I presume there are two people who has
questions. Yes, Dr. Nihal Pitigala, can I please intervene?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yes, yes. So there are some people who showed their hand on Zoom. Dr. Nahis Sattar, can you please unmute your microphone? Yes.
Hi. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and
clear.
clear.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so thank you for the excellent presentation. So I had a question for Dr. Wickramasinghe. That is, that relates to what you said towards the end of the presentation, that like say the situation in 2022 seems reasonably okay in terms of the food availability we have. But say if the war continues, or if there are weather shocks, then we might be facing further crisis in 2023. So my question would be, like for countries like Bangladesh, which are to some extent dependent on imports of food commodities, what should be the message for what should these countries do to face a sort of situation, or how could we prepare for something like that? Like, for example, you've also mentioned in your presentation that the input prices are also rising, so there is not much of a margin for the farmers or producers to capitalize on. So like basically, what can we do to avert any crisis in terms of food shocks?
Thank you for the excellent question. It's a very hard question to answer. What we are saying is that at the international level, when we aggregate numbers, we see that based on the consumption levels, historical consumption levels, we know that the available food supplies, both in terms of expected production as well as what is available in based on our estimates or stocks, then that should be enough. But at the country level, FAO is encouraging a lot of countries, the whole world basically, to desist from imposing export restrictions. We have seen time and again that export restrictions very often exacerbate the situation beyond, most of the time it's it exacerbates. But of course, we can understand that there are political compulsions at the country level to impose export restrictions, or in some cases, I understand it is purely because of to capture some of the subsidies given to production of food commodities. But one at the international level, the best solution will be to keep markets open. That will lead to much less volatility in food prices as well as availability across the board. That is what we have seen in recent past in terms of the crisis, as well as the war in Ukraine, as well as export restrictions imposed by other countries. Now, it is very true that input prices have been rising significantly. And the other day, I, for example, participated in a discussion with the International Dairy Federation, currently being held in India. What I understood from some of the discussions was, even in European Union, production for milk, for example, milk production, producers may not want to really increase production because of concerns over the rising feed prices and so on. These are concerns not just in countries like ours, food importing countries, but large food exporting high income countries. Now, the best solution will be for having some international understanding on what could be done. And then other mechanism, in case of South Asia, I understand that India has proposed time and again that they would like to ensure regional food security. Whether how far that will go, I don't know. But that is the situation we are facing. It is not easy to solve because all these international energy prices, as well as other input costs and so on, of course, partly because of the impact of pandemic, all these impacted rising production costs and so on, that continue to feed into food production processes, which is difficult to resolve. But I think at the international, the best way would be for us to be open at the global level, and then have that dialogue going to sort of minimize the impact of these restrictions. From FAO's side, FAO has proposed something called international, some sort of a facility for importing, short-term sort of proposed a mechanism to support countries impacted by the rising food prices, because based on our estimates last year, last June food outlook, we also saw that most of the food importing countries have begun to pay higher amount of money for importing less volume of food. So meaning that they will have less food but pay higher amount of foreign exchange. So this FAO, together with other international agencies like the IMF, World Bank, have been negotiating for opening this international financial facility for highly impacted countries. This is another element that FAO has been looking at. These are some of the things that we promote. And of course, at the country level, one other thing we could do, of course, is to get into smart agriculture, which, of course, easier said than done. But based on whatever the support that we can get from agencies like FAO and so on, get into very precise use of fertilizer and so on, perhaps is the way to way for the future. Thank you.
Okay, let me actually try to be a little innovative and ask, is there any questions from any participants from Nepal or Bhutan? Anybody?
Nihal, I have been raising my hand.
Yes, go ahead, Achyut.
Let me thank Dr. Wickramasinghe for his excellent global overview. Which I guess really gives the macro picture. What I like to know is that since our program is focused more at the regional level, does FAO monitor production and prices at the regional level, like South and Southeast Asia? And if so, what sort of scenario that they can present to us? Because I think this is a very critical question, and I know our colleagues from Bangladesh has also asked it. From Bhutan point of view, Bhutan is a major food importer. We have limited, facilities or land for increasing internal production, and that is also marred by wildlife and vagaries of weather. And therefore we have no other option but to import. Now, if yesterday, a few days back now, for instance, in India, had applied 20% export tax on export of rice, which is a major item for consumption in Bhutan. And also yesterday I was listening to NDTV, which indicate that the inflation is much more at the rural level than being at the urban level, which confirms what Dr. Wickramasinghe has been saying, that the inputs for agriculture products produce are so expensive, that is creating this problem. So coming back to the main question, could you please address this regional issue from FAO's point of view? I know, for instance, within SAARC, we used to have this SAARC food security scheme. I'm not sure whether it is still alive, but that is there for real emergencies. But I don't know anything else apart from that, and I would like to hear from you, Dr. Wickramasinghe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, from FAO's point of view, as I mentioned, this FAO Food Price Index is monitored and measured at the global level, but our division also has something called food price monitoring and analysis tool that I have provided the link in my last slide, that you will receive it, and you can look at country-specific prices of I don't know how many, it has hundreds of, it monitors hundreds of food commodities at the local level, at country level. Every month it is updated on a monthly basis. You could use that as a basis for even constructing country-specific or even region-specific some sort of aggregates to see how, let's say, the BIMSTEC region or South Asia region is the prices are behaving in those regions. That is number one. Second, you ask also whether we have a mechanism to see some possible perspectives. Unfortunately, our task is to monitor prices and then production in short-term changes. But we have another set of colleagues working on medium-term projections. We could work with them, convince them that there is a huge interest looking at specific regional level. And I know that last year they looked at, for example, African region or the MENA region. I don't remember exactly. But likewise, what they do is that based on our numbers, they do forecast for a medium-term 10-year outlook using the FAO OECD modeling framework. They use something called COSIMO. That gives some way to look at the evolving scenarios based on given conditions for a particular region. So that is second option. For the third point that you raised, yes, indeed, I understand very well that in rural areas, the prices, they are suffering from a number of factors. One, input prices are rising, and then they are also at the extreme level in terms of prices that they pay for commodities, because as you know, we have this huge transaction cost differentials between regions. Sometimes a food commodity, when it goes to a rural mountain region in Nepal, for example, prices could double, triple, depending on how much transportation costs and so on. So those are factors that we need to take into account. And indeed, we can do analysis, but interventions must happen at the local level. That's unfortunate reality that that I can see. In fact, this is very close to my heart, because I did work on these transaction cost differentials some time back, and I perfectly understand the situation, and it continues to be the key driver for rural development, as far as I can see, without addressing some of the fundamental factors for these existing transaction cost differentials across space. We cannot really get into any serious development efforts in agriculture. Thank you very much.
Okay. Is there anybody else that Erandati? Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Nihal. I had the same question on now. In a crisis situation, we are promoting homegrown policies to tackle the food security. And in a crisis situation, when the crisis is over, what we are doing is promoting promoting more trade with considering this comparative advantage and so on. So now there's a conflict between these two always when a crisis arises and so on. So what kind of policies would be better addressed now? We know crisis situations, we cannot avoid, it comes time to time. So how we can keep a balanced approach in the country to face this?
Arundhati, you are very right that it is the problem at the global level, and as you see, entire world was taking a very careless sort of view, if I may say so, for a long time about the food situation, because everybody thought, including most of us economists, thought that food prices will continue to decline because of rise in productivity level of agriculture and so on. And indeed, for a period of time, if you look at even all the way from even monthly prices we have, 1990 to let's say 2005 or so, prices were really stable. And when prices are stable, we tend to forget that food is an important commodity, the most important commodity for lot of people, especially in rural areas, developing countries, but to make a balance, of course, what we recommend from our side is that we already have existing monitoring mechanisms in place. And for example, the simple methodologies that we use for even doing short-term forecasting, for example, we base our estimates on what we call commodity supply and demand balance sheets, basically. We look at, we keep on monitoring them, the conditions emerging at the country, at the global level. And of course, these are, we look at country level and aggregated at the global level. Unfortunately, at the country level, sometimes, not sometimes, very often, implementation or the use these available techniques and tools to even monitor food situation is not happening in earnest, in sort of with seriousness that it should have. For example, if for Sri Lanka, if we maintain simple food balance sheets and then keep on updating somebody, dedicated 10 people should be enough to do that. And if you do that, then what you have is you can already know what is likely to happen in the next season. And based on that, then you can, before we get into the crisis situation, then you can address the situation. Then that mechanism must be there. So unfortunately, it is not happening. What I recommend is to start off with the available tools for us, like a simple thing like preparing basic food balance sheets, commodity balance sheets for each of these countries, and then keep on monitoring the situation. Also using freely available resources, as I mentioned earlier, like for example, FAO puts out all these 10-day weather forecasts, for example, satellite images, the vegetation index, and so on. There is a huge amount of freely available information that we could use. And on top of, if you lay out these different factors, demographic factors, as well as food security and poverty situations on top of each other, you could figure out, even at square kilometer level, which region in Sri Lanka, for example, will have less production and so on. So I think my recommendation is for our part of the world, for any country in the world, is to do that. And these are being used by other countries, and it is not, as far as I understand, not much is happening in some of our countries, unfortunately. Thank you very much.
Okay, there are two. Thank you, Arundhati, for that question. There are two others. Pushpa, you are there. Kamarul, let me get to Kamarul first and then come to Pushpa. Or Pushpa, do you want to go ahead first? Then we come to Kamarul.
No, I can come later, Nihal. Let Kamarul go first.
Ms. Kamarul, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for giving me opportunity to talk at this prestigious event. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Wickramasinghe for an extensive presentation and follow-up answers of the questions which had been raised by different participants today. So at first, I'd like to share some of my findings, and then I'd like to actually ask a few basic questions, for which I could not find an answer. For example, I was looking through Pakistan, Turkey, and other similar countries to identify what is the impact of food price on inflation. So what I found is the food price, first of all, is very persistent. Number one, that is the food price inflation is very persistent. It doesn't go away so easily. Second one is food price inflation affects in two different rounds. In the first round, it affects the CPI, and then due to the rise in overall price level, as all of us, we understand, the wages and inflation expectation also gets changed. And because of that, obviously, further inflation happens. And another one is the weight of the food price in the CPI in these regions specifically is also very high compared to, let's say, the developed economies. In our country, for example, the weight is 58%. So it is really huge. So it has significant contribution in overall inflation. Then pass-through is the most important issue about which I was really concerned. What I found through different researches, even in Turkey, that pass-through from producer to consumer and global price movement is not the only reason for, let's say, the inflation of the food price, but it is still important. And second one is the weak exchange rate, which has already been mentioned in this discussion so far. Another thing is the subsidies and price controls. They tend to delay the pass-through, specifically in the case of increase in food price. Now, my question is, in view of all this, since the food price is coming down, so we can expect that the inflation is also going to come down in these regions. But the question is, why is the pass-through a bit slower? Is there any policy hindrances that is actually limiting the pass-through and reducing the impact of inflation from our lives? So that is actually my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the excellent question. Yes, I think your question itself, in a way, contained the answer to the question. Look at it this way. I mean, for pass-through to happen from international food prices to domestic food prices 100%, then we are talking of some economies completely open and not having any tariff or non-tariff. Tariff could be, but non-tariff barriers in any form that you mentioned. Now, the unfortunate reality is many of these countries, we have a lot of restrictions on imports, and very often for imposed on various political compulsions, as well as safeguarding some sections of the society and so on. And it is indeed understandable that some countries try to control prices, as increasing prices can impact the very poor. But the reality is that, in fact, as you mentioned, sooner or later, these prices will have to, somebody will have to give way, either through fiscal policy, as we have seen in Sri Lanka and other parts of the world. So I don't have an answer as to what we should be doing, but I know that this pass-through does not happen, as I mentioned a couple of times. Now, food prices at the international level, international prices have been coming down. But at the same time, even in Europe, even in Italy, where I live, retail prices have been still increasing for various reasons. It's not necessarily because of various barriers and so on, but of course, depending on I mean, when we, let's say for food commodity, it's not just, so it's not simple, because you have a certain portion is imported, certain portion is domestically produced. And if you have, say, for example, you continue to import the same volume, but domestic production has gone down, as in Sri Lanka, or other factors, then of course, domestic availability is lower. Now, if you also face the situation of not having adequate foreign reserves to import or increase imports, then you are stuck basically having, then that will be reflected in domestic prices. So first of all, of course, we cannot expect a perfect world as we would like to have. We will continue to have subsidies, we will continue to have distortions, but the important point is that one way or the other, consumers at the end will begin to pay for these differences. So, I mean, these are real questions. Of course, we don't have answers for everything, but at country level, we need to really, that's what I think SOTI, CUTS, and SANEM, and all these institutes have been trying to promote, have a dialogue, open markets transparency, and so on, but that is not happening, unfortunately. And at the regional level, I'm of course aware of this SARC food bank and so on, but it has not functioned effectively. So, you know, so as a region, continue to face these problems at the country level, and it's rather a difficult kind of situation we see. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Pushpa?
Thank you, Nihal, and thank you, Dr. Wickramasinghe. That was a very comprehensive, very informative presentation. Perhaps my question or comment might not be directly related to the presentation as such, but I was kind of thinking about, you know, this food as a very political commodity, so to say, that we have seen, whether it's global trade or regional, you know, at the regional level. When it is actually needed the most, we don't see it. Especially in a crisis where there needs to be more trade, there is export restriction, and even during other political events, actually, food becomes the first target of all the countries, or most of the countries, so to say. Perhaps this is a reason why I think people have started losing, you know, trust in understanding that trade in food commodities is actually meaningful, right? That's what we have started seeing, and we are seeing in many countries that they are now trying to go back into being self-sufficient or self-reliant in food commodities, which again is not that easy actually, because if we take the case of Nepal itself, even if we say that we want to be self-reliant in food production, but then on the input side, we still have to rely on imports. Without importing fertilizer and other like seeds and other things, the food production is not going to go ahead in any way. So I find that policymakers are also in a kind of a dilemma as to what is the best course that they should be taking in terms of promoting their own agriculture, because again, there's no return in agriculture. That's the reason why people have been leaving their farms and then just moving away, moving abroad. So I think that the dilemma before the policymakers is about, thinking about the right balance in terms of promoting one's own food agriculture, but also trying to make the best of international trade in terms of reducing the crisis. So I would not say the FAO itself. I mean, like, or say like, does FAO have any thoughts or any position on this, or what would be your personal take on this, Dr. Wickramasinghe?
Well, I cannot state an FAO's position. Let me speak on my behalf. I take your point very well, and I see food as a weapon in many cases, and it has been used, as you said, it happened in 2008, 2006-8 crisis. And some countries started importing extensive volumes of food, fearing, and then other countries started imposing restrictions. And so that, as I said, exacerbated the crisis. Even under this scenario, when prices were rising, at that very precise moment, then countries thought that they will have less food for their own people or for the region, and then started imposing higher taxes or export restrictions and so on. That exacerbated the crisis. And so I agree very much with your the statement that there is this dilemma. People are leaving agriculture because it doesn't sustain. It doesn't give you farmers enough to sustain and no advancement in life. And so there is, I mean, we cannot blame them. Of course, the only way they can escape poverty is to move out of rural areas into either urban areas or altogether get out of the country and then go somewhere and then earn something and then come back. Now, to address this crisis, I think my personal take is that I think for countries, we need to start thinking about sustaining a basic level of some level of production at the country level in order for us to be able to, ensure food security for its own population at some level. I mean, self-sufficiency, of course, I don't believe in. We cannot, we will never be succeeded in reaching self-sufficiency in any of the food commodities. Of course, in some cases, yes, for some years, we will even produce extra amount of food, like, for example, rice. But that is, our target should be, I believe, to sustain at a certain level and then start thinking about how we could really thinking about this agricultural sector as a introducing more technology and attracting youth. I mean, FAO has a number of programs to promote technology transfer and promoting engagement with the youth. And there are a number of countries that have, including, have been trying really hard to promote youth engagement in agriculture, especially in not in our part of the world, but including Japan, the United States, New Zealand, Australia, and so on. As I mentioned, some of these countries are also facing huge labor shortages. At the moment, for example, Australia and New Zealand both are facing labor shortages. How they try to manage, including the United Kingdom, for example, meat sector. How did they try to tackle? They open their immigration quota. And so allowing foreigners to come in and start working in agriculture. Like providing incentives, providing various other types of support to agriculture is what they do. And there are indeed a number of other channels some other countries have been trying or using. For example, if you look at the Canadian agricultural situation, production system, they use so-called supply managed production, meaning that they have a certain level of production allocated across various regions. I can speak for milk sector, which I know very well. What they do is that there is a level of quota that they decide at the country level. And then they allocate that production level to each of the provinces so that that production level is reached regardless of the prices. If there is a decline in prices or whatever, then the Canadian government intervenes and then either raise prices and provide that support. So what happens at the end is that then that level of production is sustained without so much of fluctuation over time. I think there are systems that we can that's worth learning, I mean, of course, some others may criticize, like United States, I know, criticizes the Canadian supply managed production system. But what they argue is that they are maintaining that level of production is important. How much we can employ these kind of techniques to our part of the world, like Nepal, of course, we need to try. Without trying, we don't know. And then the other area is, for example, cooperatives. And we have not really, I mean, India uses, for example, cooperative movement very effectively for producing in the milk sector. Why India, for example, was so resilient during the 2020 pandemic, mainly because of the ability that India was able to mobilize that network of village cooperatives very effectively to sustain milk production without stopping. And then some of the cooperatives continued to buy milk even when they were not able to sell in some weeks. We did some research on India, how India was able to sustain this milk production, why Indian milk production was resilient compared to the rest of the world. That is something we came out. And the other factor was the availability of processing capacity. And for example, how many milk factories do we have? And capacity for converting milk into milk powders. I mean, these are some of the examples that I have seen why some countries or some sectors are more resilient than the others. I think there's a huge amount of things that we can learn from one another and apply for our countries to sustain production at certain level. And I think that's the way to perhaps go. Maybe SOTI could initiate some sort of mechanism to share this various knowledge. It's not research per se, but at least some way to understand, discuss, and then how we could benefit from some of these available mechanisms, so to say, to sustain production at certain levels. Thank you. Thank you, Pushpa. Excellent question.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody. I think we could go on for a little longer. I'm sure there are others who are just shelving some of their questions, but I would still open the floor if there's any last minute questions as we are running out of time. Now, you touched with the last statement, Upali, you touched upon something very important. The tension between the fluctuation of international prices on one hand, I won't take very long, and then the domestic policy on the other. And at what point do you adopt an industrial policy? Now, you mentioned passingly, maybe some countries should maintain, especially countries are raising this question now, given the accessibility to food and the price, but should the countries maintain some sort of a buffer all the time? Should that be perpetual? And also that gives credence to people who wanted to sort of have the argument for self-sufficiency, and that raises the specter for some of the smaller countries as well. Now, you mentioned about India. Would there be a situation where the country size would differ? Obviously, India is completely different from Bhutan or Nepal, for example. The ability to sort of produce for self-sufficiency with the huge welfare impacts. So in that circumstance, what is, it's not a question, it's a statement and a question. Can you elaborate a little more?
Well, I understand that there is this impact at the country level, I mean, the country size, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything when it comes to specific countries, I mean, like, for example, if you take New Zealand, for example, New Zealand has I don't know, 5 million people, but in terms of milk production, milk exports, it's a main key factor in international price determination. It's one of the largest countries when it comes to milk. Now, that is one thing. Now, on the question of this maintaining buffer, I don't believe in, if it is at all government-sponsored buffer mechanisms, I will wholeheartedly say no. It will never work in our part of the world. We have tried hard, even in Sri Lanka, maintaining various kinds of purchasing and processing, selling mechanisms through the Paddy Marketing Board and so on. These are open to various kinds of interventions and so on, and they tend to fail. What I'm talking about is giving that opportunity for farmers themselves to cooperate among themselves and maintain certain level of production that they know that they can maintain, receive a certain level of price. you may not agree with me, Nihal, about the Canadian example, but I tend to think that that's a great example for some of the countries like ours to maintain certain level of food production. There is no government sort of stocks or anything maintained, but it's all at the farmer level. And they produce, they receive a certain price, and then they could continue to do so. That is what I'm talking about. And if you go in the route of things like Paddy Marketing Board in Sri Lanka, then of course we end up having another huge loss for all the consumers rather than helping the situation. So I think way to go about is to, at a very high level, if I may say so, as much as reduce these transaction costs faced by farmers at the farmer level, rural level. If you can help them, and then these transaction costs so that they can adopt technology, they can adopt new ways of production, sustain production over time, and sustain their lives, I think that is what we should be targeting. That's what I personally believe. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, we're almost coming to nearly 2-hour mark. Unless if there is any question, we will wrap this up, and I may make a suggestion. If there are any questions that you think that you were not able to ask, or you have some afterthoughts, feel free to post them to either Sanim or me. Dr. Wickramasinghe's telephone numbers or the email address is not there, but we'll make sure that we forward it to Dr. Wickramasinghe to get a feedback on. So with that, I think this was a very excellent. I'm sure I have another 9 questions I can ask you based on the presentation you made, but I'll reserve it for another day, which goes on to show how much enthusiasm we have for this particular subject. And there are a lot of areas I think we still need clarification. I would say that, you mentioned about the cereal being the important part of the food crisis that we need to sort of be concerned about. There are a lot of unanswered areas in that where the trajectory is. So a lot of these things to keep an eye on. With that, I thank Dr. Wickramasinghe for this excellent presentation, very thoughtful, very significant, few pieces of information people to work, and also the data and the sources you mentioned, some of the analysis that your colleagues are doing, as well as the links that you have provided. I think we will share the presentation with all the participants. So if there's anything that they can sort of, as I mentioned, field a question or send it to us at some stage in the future. Thank you very much to you and to the participants. It's almost 3:30 my time in the morning. So with that, I will say goodbye. Thank you, Sherd, for hosting this, and we'll speak again very soon. Okay, Upali, I'll be in touch.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Dr. Upali.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nihal. Thank you, all of our participants.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr.